Hey everyone, it's Matt here, and I just wanted to make a video today for you about my farm and how it relates to some of these global issues that we seem to be getting a lot worse recently. Because I must admit, during the lockdown, I was paying a lot of attention, understandably, to what was happening globally, because I wanted to know where this was going to put me on my farm, and in the future wanting to head back to Eastern Europe. And we are all so used to so much misinformation online that it seemed like a really good time for me to make a video about where I'm at on my farm in regards to the long-term future, because you do need to understand things appear to be changing now. And we need to be ready to react to what realistically is a threat. Because I remember when Trump was elected, I responded strongly to the sense of panic, which, although was not so overblown this crisis, it still made me aware that panic amongst large populations is probably the most dangerous aspect of this era that we are now in entering, which I think is going to be marked by so much uncertainty. This is why I chose to move to the country, because I looked at what was happening in Auckland and realized that long term having a normal lifestyle was simply unsustainable, and that events would accelerate to make city life fairly unpleasant if you were not a high earner. Whereas living rurally now, I always underlined it would be the growth of internet culture, as well as being only hours drive from the city. Well, that meant that you were never really cut off socially, or from whatever utility you required from being close to the city, but not actually in it. I did not imagine that these specific conditions we are facing with the virus would eventuate, but I have been in a state of shock. But that my life here on the farm did not actually change despite everything that was happening, except that I collected a bit of extra shopping twice over that month, and that made me feel really confident that by acting on what I knew and could see was happening, that systems were fragile and could break down quickly, where huge populations were relying on them, and that the consumer supply chain was really the issue we were facing. These were perspectives that were worth sharing. Because you see, New Zealand is a very special case, and when we're trying to assess how vulnerable we are to a global catastrophe, because New Zealand produces enough food for 40 million people, it's very unlikely that the New Zealand government will lose control of the population because we can no longer feed and have enough water for people. It is unlikely that the New Zealand state will collapse under pressure, and given that our electricity is mainly hydropower, it's not likely we will have an energy crisis either. And what I'm saying is mass civil disorder and social breakdown is not likely to happen in New Zealand the way that it might in America. See, on my farm, I just cannot imagine how bad things would have to get before there is no power, so that I can't even store in freezers food that I'm growing, and that I can't heat my home in winter or run my electronic devices. There'll be no internet. I mean, this is hugely reassuring to me, and that really all I need to do is bring my situation here on my farm to a point where I do not rely on anything imported. And if you start to think about it, you can think of a lot of things, but coffee is a big one. And at the end of the day, I think we have to accept that in a world where that coffee can no longer be bought in New Zealand, we will have to accept that we are all having to make a lot of big changes in a new kind of world. So what exactly am I expecting? Well, we can use a base case. We can use World War II as a model. You might think that you're looking at an acute crisis 5 to 10 years long, before things start to turn around and stop getting worse and then start to improve. I predicted that this might happen sometime in the 2030s, and it seems unlikely. It could be related to a power struggle between America and China, and climate issues happening at an enormous scale. But it is quite possible, with this virus situation as a catalyst, there's such a three-way confrontation between China, America, and the climate, may reach a breaking point within this decade. This is not probably going to be open warfare between China and America, but this is the tone being set now, and this is what I recognised early on in the piece, that especially in New Zealand, the virus is not the big issue here. When the virus is dealt with, we will discover we have some much bigger problems, that our very fragile economic system has been dealt some very severe critical damage, and a lot of the issues that we've been hearing about for so long will come home to roost. Many jobs and industries are simply useless and unsustainable. They cannot be supported in a time of crisis, and so you get massive collapses of whole parts of the economy, and people are forced to go back to far more sustainable lifestyles, cooperating locally independent of the consumer supply chain that requires fossil fuels to bring you products from overseas in order to provide for your needs. Once again, having spent time in Eastern Europe and the general state of the place there after the collapse of communism, well, it doesn't really concern me that we simply won't have the resources to live the life that we do now, because they're living okay. They don't have the big money, the prosperity we have in the West, but they're getting by however they can. And it's not, it's not like they're living in some sort of Mad Max reality. So on my farm, I have my tenants, and with that forms a little cooperative hub, and I have my sleep out here, which I'm likely to be thinking about. I've thought about a place to create this co-op space with food and building supplies, and what you're doing is you're getting ready for an extended period of crisis, because I'm quickly realizing the huge issue is storage. I'm accepting here on the farm, for example, here, it's never going to rain in February again. We are going to do 2 to 3 months every year without rain, and we absolutely need to store water to grow our own food, because there's more than enough water coming off the roof here in the house when it rains all winter, but we can only store 2 to 3 months worth. And this is a pattern that is familiar, it keeps repeating. We can collect water, we can collect power and energy and batteries, we can collect and solar panels, but we can collect flour and we can collect coffee and such items that may become inaccessible. But the storage of such items is the consistent issue. When I'm introducing to you the kinds of practical issues that you might be dealing with when you have reached a good size for your cooperative group, you may be networking in, because living the lifestyle of someone who is, say, getting an unemployment benefit on a farm, in a rural area, is basically a good model of where we will all need to be in order to basically for the planet not to melt down. And obviously there are huge opportunities for us to avoid it getting this bad, but right now that's just not realistic. The virus has given us a taste of how uncertain and precarious of a situation we really are in. And although this video is related to the farm, I really want to make the point that although we are very safe in New Zealand, whereas in other parts of the world we will see real catastrophe unfolding, but Auckland is not really safe anymore either, because it's not a good idea to stay in Auckland. I will be committed long term to building up my networks in a community here northeast of Huntly. That's where I'm based, because I am utterly convinced that in my community, if we were cut off from the rest of the world, we would survive. I am surrounded by cows, and all the people in my area, are the rugged, resourceful, classic Kiwis, but in Auckland you have the panic of a mass population, and I've talked about the massive disruption that is coming economically. We've heard about the robots coming to take our jobs, and now that's what's going to happen, because the economy can't sustain it not happening. And that kind of large-scale unemployment is not likely to make the cities any safer or happier than they've been in the past. My approach to my farm is just to start pushing living in this way, because it is likely that we will have to be living in this way in 10 years, and it's really not that bad as many of you have discovered on lockdown, because you've got much more time and you're not really going anywhere. It's not as exciting, yes, it's true, but you don't get a lot of the treats that you used to in the modern city life, but it is bearable, and the slower pace of life is actually really nice, because you can focus on what you really should be doing for your health and what you'd like to be doing with your time, and a lot of what you're doing socially is really just happening online anyway, and that's okay, because that's simply how we connect now, and those are things you possibly picked up on while you were on the lockdown. So yep, this is just a video I felt I needed to make, not just about my farm, but what my farm is in terms of this bigger picture, this global picture of what's happening now. I didn't feel it was a good idea to not let people know that in order to be prepared, what you've got to do is start forming local networks. You've got to know your neighbours and the people around you. That this helps you reduce your reliance on the consumer supply chain, which is the reliance on fossil fuels that bring you products from overseas that were made with fossil fuels, including the fossil fuels you need to run your vehicles and such things. Because this is where we're likely in New Zealand to be experiencing hardship in the next decade or two. Because no one will starve, no one will be freezing by a candle in the dark. Those kinds of catastrophic situations are not likely to happen here. But by forming cooperative networks, we are able to be better prepared for whatever bad stuff could be happening. And if we are lucky enough that it doesn't happen by some miracle, then there's a lot worse you could be doing than going rural. And I'm committing myself to alternative housing solutions in rural areas after what I've got cooking up on my farm here with my tenants. So I think the smart way to be going forward is to, if you find yourself getting squeezed by these changes, that are taking place, you need to keep following the videos I'm doing about my farm, about setting up some land, getting some cabins possibly that could be paid for by winds. I know we've already done it, all that kind of thing. It's all possible. Living on the dole out here is possible. It is actually possible how I'm doing my food co-op here and such things, and you will certainly hear more about all of this. This video though, today was just about to talk to you about the scale of bad stuff that could happen and how I'm getting so prepared right here on my little farm for global whatever. And you can hear about all that next time, so thank you for listening and cheers!